Good evening. Hey, thanks for coming on a beautiful July day here in Michigan. On behalf of the Gerald R. Ford Presidential Foundation, the Gerald R. Ford Presidential Museum, and most importantly, the Hauenstein Center for Presidential Studies. I have to make the comment that what a great relationship when I started here a year ago that I found that we had with Grand Valley State University and the Hauenstein Center for Presidential Studies. That tradition continues, and we're so fortunate tonight to have the president of Grand Valley State University, President Haas. He's going to come up and say a few words. Thank you for coming.
Thanks, Joe, and thanks for the hospitality, too. It is a remarkable partnership that we have with the Ford Museum and Library and Grand Valley State University. And I see it just continuing to flourish through my years here as the president of Grand Valley. I just wanted to say welcome, and just so proud to have a chance to recognize a few and say how thrilled we are to have this opportunity to learn from each other. But my first, I think, real thrill whenever I'm at these types of events is to recognize Ralph Hauenstein. The Colonel, as I say, really had a vision in creating a center for presidential studies talking about leadership. And we have, through these years, really tried to fulfill his vision on bringing great speakers, great events to the greater Grand Rapids region. So, Colonel, thank you very much. I salute you, sir. And this opportunity we have tonight is again to learn through this lecture. We are going to be focusing in on maybe some of the lessons learned in Vietnam. My background, I'm very proud to have said to share with you that I was sworn into the service in the Coast Guard in 1969, July 4th actually. So I'm coming on 41 years since I was standing in a field in Connecticut. But I was standing there on the shoulders of men and women like Ralph Hauenstein. My dad was a cook in the Navy in the Pacific Theater during World War II. And then I met my wife to be on July 6th of 1970 right here in Michigan. And I stand on her dad's shoulders as he is a retired colonel in the Navy who battled through the Bulge during World War II. Excuse me, what did I say? Army, what did I say? Navy. Okay, I'll get there too.
You're a Navy guy.
I know. I'm glad Marcia's still around. In the Army. So through those years of service, I have really grown with a great appreciation of those who have served in Vietnam. I did not serve in Vietnam, served during that period, but I did have people, classmates, and others who were just a little bit older than I serving in Vietnam and then came back. In fact, my first commanding officer when I was stationed on the Coast Guard Cutter Acacia in Port Huron just came back from serving on an 82-foot patrol boat. And he had stories, some very interesting stories, fascinating stories, but one in which he was standing at the radar and sniper fire came through and ripped through that radar. And now he is going to be entered. I saw this in the alumni bulletin of the Coast Guard Academy on the Wall of Valor. And there's others who are now being recognized for their heroic actions during that period. But now I'm also the proud dad, Marcia the proud mom, of 3 children who are all on active duty as we speak. One in a major in the Air Force, flying fighters. My son in the Coast Guard, just finished off his responsibility as a commanding officer of a cutter in Alaska. And our daughter, who's a Lieutenant JG, serving in the Nuclear Navy. And I'm just thrilled to see now that next generation. Many of whom this evening are serving in harm's way. I'd like to take just a minute and let's just think about, as we come to this 4th of July where we celebrate our freedoms, there are men and women serving in uniform on this day who are in harm's way. Can you just take a moment of silence and think about those men and women tonight? Thank you. And on this day, and as we are in this Ford Museum, leadership is what the president was all about, making those decisions, tough decisions. But we have in our audience, I am certain, men and women who served our nation. Could you please stand and be recognized for your service? Thank you. Thank you from all of us. Well, it's my opportunity now to turn the podium over to Brian Flanagan, the Associate Director of the Hauenstein Center, who will introduce our speaker. So, Brian, thank you.
Well, thank you, President Haas, and thank all of you for joining us tonight. I have to begin by joining Tom in thanking all the veterans in attendance tonight. Thank you for your service. Thank you for your sacrifice. Of course, there are always two veterans in particular that we must recognize. Colonel Ralph Hauenstein, who from the beginning has been so supportive of our center, of his center, and we can't thank him enough. And then, of course, President Gerald Ford, who is here in spirit tonight. And I have to thank Joe and thank Elaine for what is continuing to be just a wonderful partnership, something that has bore great fruit for 10 years now and hopefully for several decades in the future. I'd be remiss if I didn't take this opportunity to quickly make a shameless plug on behalf of WGVU for the LZ Michigan event that's happening this Saturday. If you have the time, definitely look for tickets. They're still available. And at that event, we are going to finally give Vietnam veterans the proper welcome home. That's at Fifth Third Ballpark this Saturday. So for more details, you can visit lzmichigan.org, or you can talk to Tim Ernestey. Tim, are you here? Okay, Tim is not in attendance, but find someone from WGVU, and they'll be able to fill you in on full detail. It's now my honor to introduce our speaker for the evening, Jim Hodges. But first, I'd like to ask that you all silence your cell phones so we can minimize interruptions. If you have a cell phone, please take that out and silence it or turn it off. And I can start by telling you that Jim Hodges is one of our favorite people in the world at the Hauenstein Center. He is a friend who has come to Grand Rapids now on 3 occasions. And he always brings with him his great stories, but also his very genuine interest in and care for our staff members and anybody else who's in the room. He has this great compassion that is rare, and we enjoy it every time. And because we so enjoy Jim's company and we invite him back so often, I always am sure to have a copy of his short biography with me at all times. Jim Hodges, formerly a sergeant infantry and light weapons specialist in the U.S. Army, kept his Vietnam War story very close to his chest for almost 40 years. To a Hauenstein and Ford audience in 2006, Jim first revealed publicly some of the details of his unit's secret missions into Laos. And it was a bit of history that's still quite sensitive to this day. Jim's is a harrowing story of a lone survivor behind enemy lines, and also of a lifelong confrontation with the specter of war. And that's what we heard about a little bit more in 2008, his second visit. Today, Jim is a polymath, he'll tell you that. He's a public speaker, an author, a teacher, a businessman, and an inventor. His public service career has included law enforcement and professional security. But his passion for decades has been his work as a cowboy and rancher near Houston, Texas, and I'm sure we'll hear about it a bit tonight. So without further delay, Please join me in welcoming Jim back to Grand Rapids.
All right, thank you very much. I appreciate it. You probably thought I was going to come riding out on my horse and do a few rear-ups and some trick shooting, and I'm sorry to disappoint you for that. He said I was a cowboy, but I'm not Gene Autry, and I'll confirm that right up front. I want to tell you how great of a privilege it is for me to be here, but I also want to preface my presentation with letting you know that something that you already know, and that is that the things that we talk about tonight are highly emotional, and they involve the core of our spirit. So if I make it through tonight without sniffling and without crying like a little baby, well, I'll be doing better than I thought I would. If those of you out there in the audience want to cry with me, I'd appreciate that. I don't want to be alone in my misery. What I did tonight is I thought I would do something a little different. I don't normally stand behind a podium and talk because I really like to connect with people and talk directly to people from inside of what my eyes have seen and what I have experienced. And I will tell you very honestly tonight that the sole purpose of my visit here and the reason for me standing here is because of somewhere around 3 million Americans that served in the Vietnam War. About 2.5, 2.7 million, whoever you want to believe, served actually in country. But we never forget about units that served flying bombers from Thailand and Guam and places like that, and also our United States Navy, who I hadn't planned on telling you the story tonight, but the battleship New Jersey, anybody ever served on that? Nobody? I was going to thank you, buy you a drink, because they saved our life. We were out of artillery support, and this guy comes on the radio, identified himself as Red Leg 6, and said, "Get your head down." They did a job for us. And so it was a combined team effort in this war. Everybody fought some more than others. The war was different for everybody. Every year, every chapter, every military region was different. And so nobody had really the same experience. What I'm going to tell you is what I saw, some of the things that I saw with my eyes, and try to set some focus on maybe some of the misconceptions about this war. The quote that I put up here on the top is awfully profound, especially from the side. How many, if you wouldn't mind, and I don't want to be silly about this, but if you are a Vietnam veteran, could you raise your hand so I could just kind of identify you, please? Thank you very much, and thank you for your service. Thank you for helping me get back here, no matter what role you play. That's still vertical and breathing, which is a miracle. But the war was misrepresented and misreported, and as one of the generals, I believe it was General Abrams, said, it was one of the first wars we ever had that was uncensored. So people got away with talking all kinds of things, and people believed it, because who else are you going to hear it from? So as we go through this tonight, I just have a few slides, and I want to leave plenty of room for question and answer and your interaction. If you guys have a story you want to share with us, I'd not only be happy to hear it, but I think everybody here would be honored to hear your story. If you look at the map that I put up here, this is something that I've been involved with. When you're in intelligence, you kind of see things a different way. And I got involved in that in 1967. And if you look at this map, I outlined this little small country here in red. And you can kind of see above it, you see how big China is imposing down on the top of that. Soviet Union, the old Soviet Republic. If Vietnam would have fell at that time, not today, at that time, and history is always about a moment, it's not about forever. You can see the catastrophic effect that it could have had. And I always believed our mission in Vietnam was to stop the spread of communism, and we've certainly seen the attempts many times, including the 1970s Afghan-Russian war. So The bully is always out there. Communists, people like that, aggressors. It's our job to police them, give them a bloody nose whenever they raise their head. So this map is pretty profound because a lot of people really don't even know where Vietnam is, and they don't understand the significance of that target in the world situation in those days. Those of you that served in Vietnam, probably like me, really didn't understand a whole lot about it, but I've come in the later years to polish myself a little bit on it, try to understand it a little better from a different perspective. Now, I'm going to try to operate this computer, and if I mess it up, Austin, I don't see any arrow keys on here. And I did this in 2006, and they told me not to move. And I know what that means from being in Vietnam. you stand stone still and you don't breathe because whatever you're messing with is probably going to blow up in about 5 seconds. So I'm a pretty good computer guru, but I'm not familiar with the... Oh, there you go. Hey, how about that? Thank you, Austin. All right. I wanted to kind of put a perspective on. We have LZ, Michigan coming up, and every one of you have heard what an LZ is. It's landing zone, right? But I wanted to show you, if you don't have a landing zone available, how do you get one? So you call your support guys, and they fly over with a 15,000-pound bomb called a daisy cutter. We called them blockbusters. Other people called them other things, especially if they fell on their head. But you look at the contrast and the measurement size between the mushroom cloud you see and the jungle surrounding it. How do you land a helicopter in there, and how do you get a mission started in that type of foliage and that type of coverage? A lot of the jungle in Vietnam was what we call single canopy. Second canopy means you had 2 wraps over the top of you and you could barely see sunlight in the broad daylight. But triple canopy means during the broad daylight, you probably wouldn't be able to see your hand in front of your face. Pretty serious foliage there. So they'd fly over, drop this thing out with a little parachute, and it would explode just a little ways above the ground. And you can see this giant mushroom cloud, and this is what an LZ looks like after the fact. And this clears a 3-acre patch, which is almost as big as my horse's stall there back in Texas. And Texans never lie. We just spread the truth about as far as we can get it. But you could land a couple of helicopters in there pretty handily. And was anybody here a helicopter pilot during the Vietnam War? Please raise your hand. Thank you very much. Thank you. And I want to tell you, from my perspective, that excuse me, these guys had ice water for blood. You try to land a helicopter in the type of situations that they flew into, and correct me if I'm wrong, sir, but they tell me that flying a helicopter is like trying to control a runaway elevator, especially if you're getting shot at and things are blowing up around you, and you know that somebody might have got to that LZ first, and somebody might have planted a mine or booby trap for that helicopter when the skids got too close to the ground. Blow you and your cargo, which was normally infantrymen, out of the air. So when I say they had ice water for blood, I mean that seriously. I've seen these guys put helicopters in places that I swear to you, I thought the rotors kind of sucked themselves in to accommodate them at the time they were landing. I cannot believe it. In our close contact with helicopters, we went everywhere with them, everywhere. They were just a part of our skin and blood. We could have not lived and we could have not functioned the way we did and that efficiently without these men that flew these things. It was just an unbelievable sight to watch the way they handled these aircraft. So I just wanted to clarify what an LZ is. So if you go to LZ, Michigan, and hopefully you will, you'll be well versed on what an LZ truthfully is. This is a guy that frames exactly what the title of our program is tonight. And I came on this gentleman, and if you know anything about me, I taught the Indian Nation's police department in the Sioux Nation, the Navajo, and also the Cherokee Nation. I have a strong bond with them because I enjoy their spiritualism, and I think there's a wholeness there that when you understand what a warrior is, This is not somebody that wants a fight. And I'll say this a couple of times, but you'll hear it now. A warrior to me has one eye on peace and the other eye on the bully. And every time the bully raises his head, you bloody his nose in the hope that peace will come. Clarence Wolfguts was the last of the Lakota Sioux code talkers. And he is certainly not here tonight, just passed away about a month ago. And his story appeared in the Rapid City Journal by Holly Meyer. She did a great job on his story. But one of the lines is this one that I put in the bottom by his son. I don't know what greater legacy that a son could leave his father than to say those words. This man, and if you know or listen to some of Brian's background, I still teach Homeland Security to law enforcement security people. And this guy personifies the word warrior in detail, because after 9/11, the first thing he did in his late 70s was to tell his son to call the State Department and tell them that he was ready to help out and find Osama bin Laden and crack their codes and start code talking again at that late age. The warrior never leaves. And out of all history, nations rise and nations fall. And politicians come and go. And countries are established and countries fall. But the warrior never leaves. The warrior is always there. So my honor to Clarence Wolfguts and his family and the code talkers of, if I'm not mistaken, 15 different Indian nations during the Second World War. Personifies what the warrior is. They bled over into us in Vietnam, and I picked up that spirit and hold it today. I want to take you back just briefly. Some of you lived through the Vietnam era and the Cold War, back when we hid under our desk at school and were afraid that the Russians were going to blow us up. But the days of yesteryear, and to those of you that are younger, we had a short period of time where life was really good, without air conditioning in the cars or the home, without cell phones, without Facebook. I know that's a horror story, right? But, you know, we lived good, and we really didn't know any better. We had a great time, and people were community-oriented, and you guys can certainly relate to that. This is one of the greatest communities, I think, I could ever land in. And I've adopted Grand Rapids as my home away from home. I brag on Grand Rapids just as much as I do Texas. So I'm proud to be here and proud to brag on it. But some of you can relate to these images here, the old Norman Rockwell, the family sitting around the table. But we also lived through something else that was pretty horrible. The end of the age of that innocence and the start of something else that is still hard for me to get over. We heard President Eisenhower, when he left office, warn us the eye of that warrior saw what was coming. And he warned us and took one of our presidents on November 22nd, 1963. And if you're of my age or older, you know exactly what that felt like, and you know what I mean when it was the end of the age of innocence. We all changed. The entire world would never go back to the way it was. And in that day, warfare launched forward. The dogs of war slipped. And we went from 15,000 advisors to 500,000 men on the ground. I brought these maps tonight just to show you very quickly some of the things that people wonder about. On the right side, you see a map of South Vietnam, And you see up at the top, you'll see the 17th parallel right up at the very top of the screen, which was the demilitarized zone, DMZ. Also, in blue, I've marked out the military corps, or the sections. There are 4 corps in the war. The stories that I'm going to bring you tonight come from I Corps, which is up here at the top. You can see that up there. And we operated out of Wade City. If you can see that around Wade, Da Nang, all that up there. I want you to kind of notice the significance of Laos and Cambodia to supplying South Vietnam from the north. On your left, you will see a military screen there that shows the infiltration routes of the North Vietnamese Army coming from North Vietnam into South Vietnam. And these red lines are extremely big because the Ho Chi Minh trails were extremely big. And there were many trails. Most people think the Ho Chi Minh Trail was one trail. There were thousands of them, and they were laced all over the place. The infiltration came from North Vietnam around through Laos, down through Cambodia. And most of you people are commonly familiar with the Tet Offensive in 1968. Occurred in Way City. And you see, if you look up on this map, you see in yellow marked Hamburger Hill. You've seen the movie maybe, and you're familiar with it. You might have fought there. Immediately to the right, you notice, to the left, is the A Shaw Valley. And these were the infiltration routes that had to be stopped. They were the first and foremost, and they brought more guns, weapons, supplies through there and stockpiled them. That's what Hamburger Hill was about, is to take that particular area out. I actually got some pictures from Life magazine that I can use tonight. And I'm kind of short on PowerPoints for these type of presentations because we weren't allowed to use cameras. And so I have no photos to show you of me standing there flexing my muscles in those days. But, and I did have some. But here we go. This is the way we live. And this is kind of a typical combat assault mission. You see a lot of helicopters in the air. And when I tell people that, you can see sometimes 50, 60 helicopters landing at one place, that's a pretty dramatic sight. And we would all fly out as a unit to these targets. If you notice also, we're up in the mountains. And what was kind of odd about my trip to Vietnam, I always watched Walter Cronkite, and he's wading around in some swamp in a rice paddy somewhere. I never saw a rice paddy except from the air. We were always in the mountains, always jungle fighters. So this is the way we got around conventionally. What I'll show you next is what's called the SOG taxi. And you might not want to ride with these guys. But this was a special operations group, and this is the way we went in and out of situations. We hung from this ladder, and you see 2 SOG teams hanging off this ladder at about 6,500 feet there. And this is a pretty harrowing experience. You're doing a little over 100 knots, and you're hanging off of this ladder. And we used what was called a swift seat. We used to tie these on ourselves, and we used a D-ring to snap ourselves onto that rope. If you get shot, it's a long way to the ground. So this is the way we inserted ourselves. And you notice this helicopter is a little different. This is what was called a Jolly Green Giant to some. And it's an Air Force helicopter, actually. And these guys flew special mission in Laos as well. This is a big helicopter. It's got quite a few crewmen. But they also have electric Gatling guns on these things that can really put some smoke out. And they were accompanied by the old World War II fighter planes that threw white phosphorus rounds in front of the helicopter and around it to suppress the enemy while they were picking up or dropping teams in. You see the jungle below is just like the jungle I showed you in the beginning, and there's no way to get in or out but this way. So these were our taxis, day in, day out, all day, every day, over and over and over. And I think all you Vietnam veterans would agree with me that maybe when you go to sleep at night, one of the main things you always hear is rotor blades. Rotor blades, always churning, always striking the air. This is the inside of the A Shaw Valley. And the picture on your left kind of gives you a quick overview of what it looked like. On your left-hand side of that photo, you see the entrance route into Laos. They told us that we were holding the devil by the tail. And the reason for that was right above this photograph in the northern side was what was called Hell's Gate. And that was supremely controlled by the NBA. And we bombed the ever-loving way out of them, and they were still operating. Very resilient, always changing, always moving, hard to hit, and tougher than nails. On your right, you see a defoliated area there, and we had Agent Orange up there. They sprayed it all over everybody and everything. But a lot of this is from combat damage. And I told some of you in my address in 2006 how severe firefights were there. When I say the fire was withering, I'm not fooling about that. I'm going to show you some slides here that kind of confirm some of this. These are the slides that I got from Life magazine, and this is actually the aftermath of the Hamburger Hill battle site in the Ashaw Valley. On your left-hand side, you see our close contact with these helicopters. And these guys, you know, they were just all around us all the time. They just fly in, fly out. You look how high up that is. These things were really up there, and the slopes were like 50 to 60 degrees, some of them steeper, some of them straight off cliffs. At the bottom, you still see the smoke in the air from heavy gunfire, artillery fire. And a lot of this was just from small arms, hand grenades, and that kind of thing. On your right, shows you the treachery of the terrain itself. We had a lot of enemies in Vietnam other than the enemy itself. We had leeches that we fought, we even had a place called Leech Valley we went in. And we had animals out there. I told Andy Rent from the river a little story about my bravery there in Vietnam, and I was cutting trail, and I felt something hit me in the legs, and we were in what was called a free fire zone, which means you fire up everything that moves. You don't ask any questions. And so I fell backwards, pulled out my modified M79 grenade launcher that was about this long, and this fires a 40 millimeter cannon shell, and it's got to go 13 feet before it armed itself. So I fell on the ground backwards, did the crab walk backwards as fast as I could go, pulled the trigger, hit my target, blew them all to hell. And I was laying there with blood all over me, all my men cut loose with everything they had, and we realized pretty quick nobody was shooting back. And I was very proud to tell you I killed a tapir that day. You've ever seen one? He scared the hell out of me, and we sent him somewhere where they appreciate tapir. This is the enemy. And on your left, you will see the NVA Army, the North Vietnamese Army. You see that they're hardcore, very well supplied, very well outfitted. And there was an exhibit here in 2006, Requiem of War, Photographs of War. And I came here to talk about that and kind of talk about that exhibit. In one of those photos, and these were photographers that died filming the war, their last photos. It was just an amazing thing to look at for anybody, much less people who were there that could imagine their last act on earth, their demise. And there was a photograph in there of an NVA soldier, and he's attacking an American fire base. And those of you that were there know what American fire base looked like. You had 15, 20 rolls of concertina wire, razor wire out there. You had mines, booby traps, everything you could put down there, Bangalore torpedoes, everything you could throw at the enemy to keep them out. This guy is charging this thing at night, and the last camera flash this photographer did was a photograph of him, frozen in time, charging an American fire base all alone with a .45 pistol. Imagine that. When I say that these guys were hardcore, you have no idea. At the bottom, you see a little bit of their training there. On the right is probably the most heart-wrenching part, and that was the Viet Cong. These were guerrilla fighters. Some of them wore these little black pajama outfits. Some of them just dressed like a normal citizen. So you couldn't really predict who was the enemy and what they were going to do. Your barber that cut your hair that morning could come in that night and cut your throat. You notice the women and children dressed out in military outfits carrying military weapons. And for the first time in history that I know of, armies met women and children who were formidable combatants, maybe better than we were. Some of them 6, 7 years old. We changed, and we wept over this type of contact. The days of honor on a battlefield were over with, and the days of hatred took its place. This was the enemy. These are the enemy positions that were captured during the Battle of Hamburger Hill. And again, if you look how well supplied this North Vietnamese army was up there on top of this hill, and how well dug in they are. You see the tunnel there in the opening in the middle, and all the boxes of ammunition and frags and hand grenades and rocket-propelled grenades, and all the AK-47s, SKS rifles. These guys were well dug in, and even though the bombardment took place and we had Cobra gunships rolling in on them, it wasn't really phasing them much. So pretty formidable deal there. I wanted to just show you some contrast. Of course, this was before the days of cell phones. We didn't have much contact with the States once we got there. So we didn't call home very much, if at all. We didn't write but a few letters maybe. And we didn't hear the day-to-day things like they hear today. In this photograph, you see people in the bush. And if you'll look at how thick this jungle is and the struggle here, just to get this helicopter to come down there and send a jungle penetrator down, which was a kind of like you see the Coast Guard use, right? And they send the penetrator down and they pull somebody out of the water. So the penetrator came down in the jungle and picked up these wounded soldiers. While this was going on, and probably at the same time this photo was snapped, you might remember those days. This was going on here. Riots in the streets, cities on fire, and the United States out of control. This lady, war is about people. I can't really tell you what this photograph does to me looking at it. Resiliency in these people was phenomenal. To be presented with this trial for just a few seconds or a few minutes might devastate many people. But these people put up with these types of things repeatedly over and over and over, and yet they came out and they went on. Meanwhile, while she's trying to save her family in this water-swollen monsoon creek, these guys were having a party, smoking dope and blowing their head off in their little hippie van. Peace and love, fun and games. Remarkable contrast. This is the mountains outside of Way City. And if you remember from the map, Way City was not only a key point, but it was right in line with one of the major infiltration routes, and for some reason the NVA had a fixation on Way City that was just unbelievable. They wanted that town, and we never gave it to them. But again, when you look at the mountains, look at the terrain and the thickness of that jungle. On a mountain just like this, right outside of Way City, November 28th, 1971, Thanksgiving Day, a Chinook helicopter, twin-engine, huge helicopter, took off. 5 crewmen aboard and 27 infantrymen from the 327th Infantry Brigade, 101st Airborne Division. And I always thought it rained a lot in Vietnam, and for some reason I couldn't figure out why I thought it rained so much. I was doing a little research and found out, to my surprise, that there were 9 named storms that blew through Vietnam and tore it up. 7 of those came through the year I was there. So a little kind of explained it a little better for me. But on that day, these 34 men lifted off after being repeatedly warned of weather and being grounded. The pilot, Joseph Savick, was a well-seasoned Chinook pilot. He was well known and well respected by his peers for being able to read weather and read terrain, and he had flown this route for 9 months. He had 27 infantrymen aboard, which means if he encountered bad weather, he would have set that helicopter down, and you could have lived out of it for a week, because it's almost like setting up a mobile home. You have plenty of food, you have plenty of water. There's no need to push it any further. They took off on Thanksgiving Day, and about an hour later, the pilot, Savick, called in and declared an emergency. They were never heard from again. And somewhere in those mountains, we looked at, just like you're looking at this photograph, we wondered where they were, because we knew they had crashed. And a frantic search took place between the Navy out in the South China Sea. We couldn't put many aircraft in the air because of the weather. The monsoon was thick and heavy. The weather was really, really bad, and the ceiling was very low. Within an hour, we got a call, and they had dispatched our unit to go out and find this helicopter and bring these guys home. We flew out as a company. That's the first time we ever actually assembled in a company element. About 111 men, 2nd Battalion, 502nd Infantry, 101st Airborne Division. And we left. We had to fly very, very low and land in the flatlands at the bottom of these mountains. There was a light observation helicopter spotted what he reported was a depression in the jungle, and we thought that's where the helicopter had come to rest. We all hoped that that was wrong, because we were right on Thanksgiving. Christmas was approaching, and on our mind was rescuing our fellow soldiers and airmen. So we took off, flew out there. Took us 2 days to hack our way up to one of the upper slopes of the mountain. And when they said in the Stars and Stripes newspaper it was a Herculean effort, they're not lying. You go up a 60-degree slope with a 160-pound rucksack and your weapon and everything else you got, and you're hacking your way every single step of the way. Meanwhile, the ground below you is slipping away in mudslides, and the rain is so hard you can't literally see from here to our United States flag over here. This was a Herculean effort. The ARVNs, the South Vietnamese Army, in this operation did a beautiful job. And they shadowed us around the landing zone we came in, and also around this mountain, so that once the crash was found, if we did find it, we could keep our mind on the recovery effort and not have to have our weapon in our hand every second. Make a long story short, it took us 7 days from the time the crash took place, and we lost contact with this helicopter. The name of it was Playtex 866. In 7 days in the monsoon rain, you can probably imagine what we found. It was a pretty sad day for all involved. I bring this story here tonight because if you read this on the internet, you'll find 4 or 5 different stories, and 4 or 5 of those different stories conflict in information. One of them in particular reads that it was a terrible accident and that there was no survivors. And I'm here to tell you tonight that that was not an accident. This helicopter was shot down by a rocket-propelled grenade. The NVA took advantage of them flying low in bad weather through the mountain. They're like a sitting duck. Hit the rear rotor assembly of the helicopter. It began to spall. It broke apart in the air, caught fire, and crashed into this mountain on a 60-degree slope and rolled about 350 feet down the side of the mountain. All 34 men, of course, were killed in that crash. I can tell you, because I was the first one there, that 2 of those airmen lived, at least long enough to try to climb up that 60-degree slope about 400 meters from where the crash site landed, trying to get help, going to the top of that mountain to get to the LZ to try to maybe set off a smoke grenade and get help. And the reason why I know that is because they were both laying side by side. And you people that have been on or around flight crews, they had no gloves on and they had no CVC helmet on their head. So that lets me know that they survived that crash at least long enough to get up to where they were at. We had always suspected that the NVA got there first and shot them as they came up the side of the mountain and then fled as we approached. I bring that story here tonight because I want to set the record straight once and for all. And one of the things that has been on my mind since I came here in 2006 was to make sure that the families of these two pilots understand and know that this crash had nothing to do with pilot error, not a thing. This had to do with a combat shoot down of a helicopter with 34 men aboard. That's the way it deserves to be recorded in history. And that's the way you will hear it tonight. Hopefully you will tell others. And somewhere, the families of these pilots will find this video of this evening. They will know and clear their minds that their sons did not only an above average job, but they gave this every single thing that they had. So I wanted to bring that story here tonight. I appreciate being able to share that with you, and I certainly appreciate your courtesy in receiving that story. All stories in Vietnam were not bad. And most of you are familiar with the Bob Hope shows, of course. And this was a kind of a lighthearted story, but it turned out to be a bad ending for me personally. We had Joey Heatherton, if you're familiar with her. And she was a blonde-headed bombshell that I just happened to be in love with. Not anymore. And I saw and heard through the grapevine that she was going to be at Camp Eagle, which is right there around Way City, for Christmas in 1971, and the Bob Hope show was coming. So I was out in the jungle, and they spread the word around, and so Jim went out there and started doing push-ups and trying to get my rucksack over my head and work out. I was telling everybody and bragging to everybody that I was going to get a date with her. She was going to be really impressed with me because I was going to be buffed up, hard-bodied, and ready to go. And then the tragedy struck, because the day we were supposed to get everybody was getting airlifted in so they could see this show. Lieutenant from the Camp Eagle called me on the radio and told me that our orders were to stay out in the bush and patrol the rocket belt out there to make sure that they didn't lob any rockets in on top of the show. So I was brokenhearted about that. The only thing that made me feel a little better was one of our chaplains, Father Michael Langston, flew out and gave us communion with about 8 cases of wine. And I'm not sure if we broke bread or not, but we had a good time. This is a... I just had to show you that because I just need to share with somebody, you know. I wasn't really a loser. And, I do have another slide here. When I put this is the final slide that I have. But I was putting this together, and this particular slide really got my goat. It really struck me emotionally pretty hard, because you don't think about this until you see it all in one place. But the men that were involved, our leaders, that became victims of not only this war, but the era, the time that it encompassed. And I'm gonna throw this on here, but I want you to, some of you will do just like I did. This will really take you back to see this all in one place. And very sobering, and especially for you that are younger. If you don't understand the time and you read nothing but the history books, this slide will bring you home to the reality of what we saw during this particular conflict. I call this high, low, and out. Men that strove to the highest levels became victims of either the war or the time and were out one way or the other. Pretty dramatic. I, being from Texas, have been to the LBJ Ranch many times, and one of my buddies was on the protection service for Lyndon Johnson through his career. Lived on the ranch until Lady Bird passed away, and finally moved away. Pretty hard to look at from whatever part of the country you really come from. A lot of men here that really evoked a lot of emotions in us and did things, good, bad, right, or wrong. They tried to lead, and they became victims of the time, of the era. So did a lot of we, whether you were inside of Vietnam or out. We all suffered the consequences of the era. And I think this slide represents that fairly well. Austin, if you can, I don't know how to turn this off. I don't want to blow it up. I wanted to leave the rest of our time here, and I wanted to keep this presentation short, but I wanted to leave the rest of the time to either answer questions or, more importantly, if you guys have stories, please share them. When I was here in 2006, I was very nervous about presenting our special ops missions in Laos. And when we did the Q&A, right in the middle of, she was sitting right here, and I kept noticing this lady, and she was shuffling papers. I thought she was a newspaper reporter. She was about the third or fourth one to actually raise her hand, and she turned out to be the wife of a man who was killed in Vietnam, who sent her a strange letter she never understood. She heard me on Andy Rent's radio show the morning before my presentation, and she came because of it. I got off the stage, and I took her right here on this floor and took my microphone off and just gave it to her. She read those letters to everyone here. One of those letters echoed what I had said on the radio program, and that was, we had heard Walter Cronkite say on the evening news there were no ground troops in Vietnam, and we were there. She read the letter from right here, standing right there. Her husband wrote and said, in paraphrase, "You'll be the first woman on your block to know that your husband is in Laos." The second time I came here in 2008, Nally Wynn, and I hope Nally's here tonight. If she is, I hope you'll shake her hand. Nally Wynn was a Laotian citizen. Some of our teams, it wasn't my team, it was part of our SOG group that airlifted her out of Laos and her family. She walked so long and hard to Saigon that her legs swelled up bigger than an elephant. And she lost her family, came here as a boat person, learned English, got her education, got a master's degree in social work, and today she counsels battered women. I just think that's nobody else I could think of that would be better than that. So these stories were profound. And when I got called to come here tonight, I was hoping that we would have another good surprise visitor that had a good story that would maybe take us back a few years. If you have any questions, if you'll hold on just 1 second, because I just want to do one thing before we do that. If you will do one thing just real quickly, and I want everybody to sit as still as you can possibly sit. Don't move. Hold your breath just a minute. Do you hear it? Because I hear it. I hear it loud. It's called peace. That's what was bought, paid for with the blood of patriots throughout history, and especially in our great test, as President Lincoln described, our great test, whether this nation or any nation so conceived can long endure. The eye of the warrior, one eye to peace, the other eye to the bullet, never leaving the battlefield. I will give you this, my little final gesture, and then I'll answer any questions, and hopefully you'll have some stories. But I think this is also important, too, to honor your presence here tonight. I can't speak for myself, and I can't just tell my story, because this story is about 3 million Americans who gave it all, and quite frankly, did a damn good job. So for all of them, and I take great pride in being able to do this for you, I will give you this, and this is from all of them. Thank you very much. And thank you all for coming here tonight and honoring these people who served and gave it all. And I give you that salute for them. Thank you very much. And I accept your applause for them, because I know that's the way you meant it. And so I'd like to just do some quick questions here for a second, and then I guess we'll head out. Anybody want to go first? That's always hard. Nobody wants to break the ice. But yes, sir.
Well, I want to thank you for clarifying something. Your one picture where you were showing all these trails that were coming down, I spent an awful lot of time in the air over Laos, where we had to sneak across the north part of South Vietnam and up into Laos, accompanying reconnaissance planes. And of course, I was in Phantom. Yes. So all we were doing was protecting that guy in case some airplane came after him. And I never knew why we spent so much time looking at all that. And you're just showing me all those supply routes, and they never explained that to me. And I was an air intelligence officer at the spot.
Well, I know that everybody in here wants to thank you for your service, and so I will say that for them. I would tell you that there's an interesting video of that. And this lady did a phenomenal job. She went over to North Vietnam, and she was actually able some way to get the general that was in charge of the infiltration routes that came through Hell's Gate down the A Shaw Valley. She was able to convince them to actually let her go out and film these trails and Hell's Gate. It's the first time. Nobody has ever been able to do that. And of course, they kind of put their own spin on it, right? But it's amazing to see, and I'm glad that some of that is finally coming forward. One day, the American government will be in a position where they can release the details of those operations. And I understand certainly why they're still classified. Still a lot of things there that don't need to be talked about yet. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Anybody else? No? Ready? Yes, sir.
I'd just like to ask you a question. There have been many people that have tried to compare the two wars in Afghanistan and Iraq to Vietnam. And some say it's very similar and some say it's not. I'd just like your opinion.
Well, you may get me run out of Grand Rapids, but I think that, in my opinion, war is always war, and it's always prosecuted on the soil where it's being committed. There's certainly comparisons to World War II and Vietnam, and you can do that if you want to. I don't see a whole lot of comparisons in the fact of the way the combat itself is taking place, because you see roles change in Iraq, Afghanistan. Sometimes, especially in the Army roles, where you used to be made to stay in your MOS, your military occupational specialty. If you were a truck driver, you were a truck driver. But now they're actually cross-training a lot of these guys, and they're actually going door to door, doing some of these search and patrol operations and things like that. I think it's graphically different. The fact that it's going on for a long time But look at the casualty rate. I mean, you can't even compare that. We had 58,000 dead in Vietnam, 305,000 wounded, and we had more amputees and more people put in wheelchairs than even in World War II. So I don't see any direct correlation there, but I certainly see similarities, and I think you could really find that in any war. And that's kind of a long answer, but that.
How about the political aspects of each war?
Well, I really had hoped you hadn't want to bring that up. I consider myself a good soldier, but I'm not much of a politician. So I just, in all politeness, I'd have to back out of that. I'm not, that would be way out of my arena. And one of these days when I get elected as the United States Senator from the great state of Texas, you can ask me that question, and I'll be more than happy to lie to you all the way. But it won't be tonight. Anybody else? Somebody? Yeah. Oh, hi, Carolyn. How are you? Yeah.
I don't know if this is a question, well, you'll let me know if you cannot answer this question, but you said there would be a time when some of this information will be released. And why is it still being under wraps? Maybe you can answer that.
Well, I can answer it indirectly. And in intelligence operations, you find interlocking tentacles. So you have informants and you have operators, contract operators, paramilitary operators, people that are actually installed in the services, the alphabet agencies as they've come to be known. And so we had an incident actually directly ties into this on the border in Texas. And there was a drug dealer, he was shot in the rear end by a border agent. And a lot of people down there got involved trying to help the border agents out and do all this kind of stuff. What good people were trying to do is help out in whatever way they understood the publicity to swing them and their emotions. What actually happened was these agents unfortunately walked in on a huge drug operation that had been going on for 15 to 20 years. And there was no way they could allow that to take place because people begin to die, disappear. You disrupt years and years and years of work by a lot of people, hundreds, thousands of people. So intelligence is not that easy. It's very complicated. And what you see overtly is not really what's going on. And you have to be very cautious about overreacting to things when you see media coverage. Most of you Vietnam veterans know that because you're victims of that. People actually believed that you were baby killers or you were all these horrible things. And those of it that were there knew that that was not going on. We didn't do that on a large scale. We didn't wake up every morning and go out and wipe a village out. Were there isolated incidents? Yeah, sure there were. But intelligence is always that way. And 40 years later, these operators are still alive and they're still moving. And intelligence is still moving through these channels. If people took this information and used it in the wrong way, you can imagine the catastrophic backlash it would have. It's not about the individual, and it certainly wouldn't be up to me to unwrap something that is better left not said. So hopefully that answers your question. Yeah. And maybe someday it'll clear the air. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
The fellow that introduced you said that you were an inventor. What
Yes,
have
sir.
you invented?
Yes. Back in 1979, you might be familiar with pepper spray. That came from my warrior spiritualism. If you know anything about the Bushido, they had a little secret art of invisibility for thousands of years, and if you found out the secret art, they'd have to kill you. And the secret art of invisibility was that you took processed capsaicin from normally a habanero pepper. You made a powder out of it, you rolled it in a little medicine ball, and you put it between the webs of your fingers this way and made a fist. Whenever you encountered an adversary, you threw it in his face. Thereby, he was blinded, and the Bushido became invisible. And so I thought, you know what, if we can do that by throwing it in somebody's face, why can't we put it in an aerosol can and spray it? And a lot of old boys kind of agreed with me, so we kind of got together and put that stuff on the market, did pretty well with it. I invented a product called Sudocon. Sudocon's the decontamination formula for pepper spray. So pepper spray, if you know anything about it, if you've ever been sprayed, you know you can take a shower and it doesn't do any good, probably makes it worse. It's an oleoresin. It's like putting butter on your skin and trying to wash that off with water. It doesn't work. So Sudocon is, again, came from the past. And I remembered a time in my past when we're right there on the border. I used to go across to Mexico all the time and eat Mexican food, real Mexican food. And I started just burning up. This lady just set me on fire, and I was yelling and screaming. I wanted a beer. And instead of that, she came out and gave me a chocolate bar and a cup of coffee. And it worked. I remembered that all those years later, and I thought, you know, she doesn't understand the science behind this, but there's got to be some. And all of a sudden I realized at 3 o'clock in the morning one time, jumped out of bed and ran in my office. My office looks like Mad Hatter got in there because it's just dry erase boards from floor to ceiling, and there's all kinds of scribble everywhere, not only belonging to me, but my granddaughter. She's a future inventor. And I realized that chocolate and coffee and peppers are alkaloids. So you fight fire with fire, right? So I developed clean and pure sucrose, put a little deionized water in it, added Johnson's No Tears baby shampoo, had my assistant spray me in the face with my own pepper spray. And nobody said I was smart. And I had a 1 gallon pail of this stuff mixed up, and I started throwing it all over myself. I was pretty happy, and it didn't work. I was a little disappointed with that. And I was flying back from Phoenix where we tried it out, and about halfway through the flight, this thing of inspiration hit me. If you've taken Chemistry 101, you'll know balance the pH. That was the secret. And so Sudocon was born, and it's still out there on the market since 1982, I think, is when we launched that. I invented my own line of police leather gear. They're still out there selling. And I think that's about the only ones I really made any money on. Yeah. Yes, sir.
I read Nelson DeMille's book, Upcountry, and he was there as a lieutenant, same period of time that you were there.
Yes, sir.
And he found it necessary to go back, and of course that's what this book was all about. Mm-hmm. But he returned to Vietnam and told the different thoughts that went through his mind, comparing it what it was like when he was a combatant. And he also mentioned that many soldiers have found it necessary to return for healing, psychological healing.
Yeah.
Did you find that you had to return, or have you returned?
No, I haven't returned. I think there may still be some wanted posters out for me around there, so I kind of stay out. We had an old saying in Vietnam, drive on. It don't mean nothing. And that was the only thing that kind of kept your head on straight when something really ugly was taking place. You just drive on, man. It don't mean nothing. Keep moving. Continue the march. And Johnny Cash actually wrote a song about that. Drive on, it don't mean nothing. So I drive on. I'm not a big fan of looking back except to use it for purposes of good in the future. I can't see any good in me going back. I can see the good in me using the information that I got while I was there during the time and using that for purposes of good in the future. I think that it would probably evoke too many emotions in me, and I'll be very honest with you, I've held it a little better together tonight than what I thought I was going to do with my emotions, but I really feel that if I went there, they might get turned loose again, and I really don't. I don't want to revisit that. Yeah.
You had one. I'm sorry. That was the essence of my question as well. I mean, many of your pictures that you showed look very familiar to me.
Yes.
And I know that units were going into Laos. My unit went into Cambodia. Unfortunately, I had already been medevaced out by a couple of months, so I didn't go, but my unit was still there. But my follow-up was then going to be whether you had gone back at all as well, because there are some some acquaintances that I have that have found it useful.
Sure.
Others, like me, I have no desire.
Yeah. And I think, whatever helps the individual, that's what needs to be done. And if people find peace in that, I'm gung-ho for it. But I had enough. I'm satisfied in Grand Rapids, to be honest with you. Yes, ma'am.
You had one slide with the contrast, i.e. Woodstock versus the front lines. And we hear today about some of our service members maybe not always feeling that over here there is the support in a somewhat similar fashion of that contrast. Could you comment a little bit on what might be the role of civilians during wartime and what the warrior who is representing us all might expect the civilian?
Yeah, thank you very much. You notice that in the airports, Vietnam veterans shaking hands with all of these people coming back. We have never quit serving, and we never will. When I say we did a damn good job, I mean it. Not just then, we're still doing it. To make sure that soldiers, and when I say that, please don't misunderstand me. I'm talking about service members, okay? Never come home to what we came home to. That they have better than that. And for once again, in world history, the warriors are respected. And they're getting that now in big doses. I was really remarked, I don't get a chance to watch much TV, but I got forced to watch America's Got Talent with my wife. It wasn't quite at gunpoint, but was getting close. And she was sitting there, and we watched a little presentation, and it was kind of a little quasi-patriotic deal, somebody singing a song. And I told her, I said, I kind of drifted back to Vietnam a little bit, and I thought, no, they might clap, but that's about all they're going to get out of this. And I'll tell you, there are very few times that I really weep, but that was one of them. And everybody in that whole place, before they were even finished, went to their feet. It doesn't get any better than that. And General Patton talked about in World War II in his writings. In the old days, the warriors would return from war and have a tumultuous parade and enjoy watching the dazed slaves walk in chains in front of them and strange animals from conquered territories. And standing in the chariot behind the conqueror was always a slave holding a golden crown just above his head and whispering in his ear a constant warning that all glory is fleeting. We brought back pride to our service members. And you people, and I say that, Grand Rapids, you put on this LZ Michigan thing. I don't know what else you could do to make any service member proud, serve this nation. And I told somebody today, and I apologize, I don't remember, about when I become emotional when I'm talking, and I kind of get that little tremolo in my voice and my eyes water up. It's not always from remembering bad things about the war. It's from appreciating the honor to serve, the honor to be in this group, these 3 million people that did this job so well. I'm humbled by that to the point of tears. I just can't tell you what that does to me. So hopefully that answered your question. I think this is a great period of time that we live in. And I think you will all join me in honoring all of our young folks who are serving right now as we speak. What a great deal, right? My dad was always worried after World War II in Korea that the torch wouldn't be passed on from other generations because they didn't have much stock in us. We had black motorcycle jackets on and we were combing our hair like Elvis. And I remember my daddy catching my sisters listening to Elvis Presley, and he went in and broke their records. We're not going to listen to that mess in this house. And any man that shakes his hips like that in the public, we don't watch that kind of stuff in this house. You know, that kind of thing. But, you know, we surprised him. And my dad's 91 years old, and I'm proud to tell you that he's, I can't say that. He's very, very proud of his son. And I'm very proud of all the people that serve today. They have picked up this torch from us. And now the Vietnam generation is disappearing, and they have picked up this torch and done us proud. And I thank all of them for that. Anybody else? Yes. Let's give them a hand, right? Okay, I guess we got time. One more question. Anybody? Yes.
First of all, thank you. Can you hear me?
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for sharing your story and everything. But a lot of journalists have commented on rising suicide rates among recently returning veterans of the Iraq and Afghanistan war. Do you think that war has changed in a way? Do you think people's reaction to it in the way that soldiers experience war, how do you think that has changed?
It all changes and it evolves with the time that you fight in. But I would tell you that a lot of the stuff that happened during our generation just really wasn't publicized that much. So I think you have kind of a dual sword there, right? And it's a very sensitive issue. We can give veterans that come back from conflicts all the parades you can give them, but if they've actually seen something that they can't deal with, it's kind of like a rape victim, right? You ladies know what I'm talking about. I saw that in law enforcement pretty heavily. You can't just walk up and say, hey, it's over with, don't worry about it. It just doesn't work that way. Some ladies go on with their lives, some don't. Same with the warrior. So I think we take that in time and place, right? Yes, sir. You have a question in the back? You just waving at me? Okay. All right, great. Well, I think, yes, sir. One more, and then I've got to get out of here.
You've given a couple of contrasts, and thank you for that. One of the contrasts that I see is a difference between Pearl Harbor, in which something around 2,500 people, I believe, were killed in the attack on Pearl Harbor.
Yes.
The country in that time stood up. A raft of folks went down and enlisted, and the nation was united in terms of responding to getting us into World War II. I draw a contrast with 9/11. More people were killed in 9/11 than at Pearl Harbor.
Mm-hmm.
It's my view that about 1% of the people in this country at this time are carrying the load for the other 99% of us. Do you have any comments as to whether you would see that as a contrast, and perhaps is it a difference in culture, is it a difference in the rest of us? What do you say?
Well, again, I think you're trying to get me lynched here, but I kind of like tough questions because I have long answers, and I'm a Texan, so if I can't get it right, I can lie about it, right? There's some direct parallels there. We all reacted the same way. We're Americans, right? And historically, Americans have been the kind of asleep at the wheel until you slap my aunt in the face, and then I'm going to come get you. And so that's kind of what happened on 9/11 and happened at Pearl Harbor and happened several other places. Again, there's some direct corollaries and there's some differences. We also have a bad habit as a country of forgetting too quickly, and we like to slap you around a little bit, and then we want to kind of quit and go on home and drink a beer. So this is dragged out, and it's got us involved in some different frontiers and campaigns. But you know, that's not really our choice. We're almost at mercy of the enemy because we're forced in a defensive position in this war versus the other. There was a clear cut, we're going after the Japanese versus who do we swing at first. So I think that's the direct contrast, right? We had a clear and defined enemy in Pearl Harbor. This time, it really wasn't. So, well, I'll tell you what, I really will look forward to talking to you all up outside. I want to certainly thank the Ford Museum for having me again. Be here the first time was a supreme honor for me. To be back again was, I can't tell you, it's just great. To share this time with the good folks of Grand Rapids is just some of the greatest honors I've had in my life. And I told people the other day, they said, well, we're doing this welcome home thing in LZ, Michigan. I said, I've already been welcomed home. These people have made me welcome. They've given me a home away from home. I've met people here that will just be my friends for life. If I never see you, any of you again after this evening, I can tell you that I will never forget you, and I will never forget the honor that you have given our service members, not only tonight, but through this entire week and weekend, and spending your July 4th in a worthy cause. So I thank you for that, and I thank you for the privilege. Thank you very much, and good night.
I know on behalf of myself and everybody in the auditorium, thank you for the service to your country, and thank you for coming back to the museum. I know on July 4th, in a couple of days, I will be thinking of this presentation and the stories you shared with us, and I hope you come back again. And I know we've got, on behalf of the Hauenstein Center, Brian's got a special gift.
I feel like I'm stealing someone else's Ralph Hauenstein bag.
Yeah, and I think there's a collector item mug in there. Join us in the lobby for light refreshments. Thank you again, everybody, for coming.
No.